Good evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to Tulane and to this ceremony. I'm Oliver Hauk. I'm a professor here, and I see many esteemed faces in the room. It's my honor to present on behalf of the Tulane Environmental Law Society the highest award that we have to offer here at Tulane, the Lifetime Achievement and Service Award, in this case, in environmental advocacy and historic preservation. And it goes to the most deserving person for that title I know in the country, who we're lucky enough to have with us here in the city, William E. Borah. Before I talk a moment about Bill, I want to recognize four people who are here and form sort of Bill's battalion in New Orleans. It's really remarkable. One is my colleague here and fellow professor, a lifelong, from 3 years old up, cousin and classmate, and of Bill, Vernon Palmer. So Vernon, if you would rise and be recognized, that would be great. And stand just for a moment. That's only part of the hit squad. We also have Sandra Stokes, who is a lifelong city activist and has been Bill's strongest support against some really difficult medical circumstances over the past years. It's fair to say, without Sandra, I don't know about Bill. So Sandra, if you'd rise for a moment. Good. Third, and by no means least, is Bill's sister. That's Ginger Mislan. Can I just say that quickly? Meislan, good. And Ginger, if you would stand. Here's the remarkable coincidence. She is an expert in city planner and city planning. And that's her life and career. And if you follow Bill's life at all, you see a morph from Tulane playboy to freeway fighter to urban planning. And I think that a large part of that morph, I've never understood where that came from, and today I do. All of these influences have fed in on Bill and made him who he is. The fourth, and I think perhaps the most distinguished and best known, is J. King Milling, our King Milling, who is with us today. King, as a very prominent banker in the city, but far beyond that, he is easily the face of coastal restoration in Louisiana. He's been the outside force pushing and guiding and leading coastal restoration in Louisiana for more than a decade. And I would ask King, if you wish, to say a few words about Bill and about this honor as a spokesman for this remarkable quadrumvirate of support system, right? Thank you for coming and for doing it. Speak right from there if you want it from here.
Well, let me just say that I'm also his first cousin. And so I've got a bias walking in, so recognize that. But we all grew up together. And our activity as youngsters was football, basketball, baseball, hitting each other, doing everything we could to make sure we were having a good time, and we did. We went to prep school, Bill was one after the other. I went to college, we came back here, Bill and I were in law school together. And I've got to say that it never occurred to me that he would end up in urban development and these types of issues. So I graduated from law school and I started to practice. And my first recognition of all of this is I began to hear these comments about Bill fighting the expressway. I thought it was a good concept. I had not a clue what the hell he was talking about. Until one day I come out of my office and I'm on the downtown going to lunch, and there's my 8-month-old pregnant wife handing out leaflets to people about this issue.
Bill works in devious ways, as you can see.
And at that juncture, I figured, well, I better understand what's going on. But I will say that what Oliver said is right. He was a remarkable force working with his very dear friend, who he will talk about. And they did, in fact, take on the hierarchy of New Orleans. They took on the newspapers, and they turned what would have been an urban disaster into something that is quite remarkable. French Quarter remains, because of his effort, the city's heart and soul is part of all of that, and I think we can contribute all of that to Bill. I don't know where it came from, but our God, it was there in him somewhere, and when it came out, it was in all states. So, needless to say, we are all delighted that the students, among others, have made this choice. I don't think it could be any better. Clearly, we are delighted, and Oliver, you got the right man at the right time. Thank you very much.
We're lucky for that. Thank you. Given King's eloquence, he's summed much of this. I will be very brief. In terms of lifetime, Bill fell into this career path totally by accident as a young Tulane Law School graduate, kicking around in graduate school abroad. And he came home on vacation and he heard about this road across the expressway, across the Jackson Square. Get this, for service to New Orleans. 6 lanes, 50 feet in the air, carrying trucks and automobiles 24/7 at decibel levels that require you to stop talking because you can't hear. Fronting several, 100 feet away, less, the cathedral, the Patawba buildings, and eclipsing Café du Monde. I mean, how many icons could you ruin with a single stretch of project? And with it, the heart of the city. And as King said, the city was for it. Bill was persona non grata, and that's just the polite way of saying what was said about him and done with him. And his partner, Dick Baumbach, and they were together like two Batmen on this the whole route. So that's where the service began, but it's not where it ended, because the second project was a bridge across the river that would then pour 6 lanes of commuter traffic down Napoleon Avenue, which is perhaps the key, beautiful artery of, until they've started building this new thing along, of uptown New Orleans. It would bifurcate it, uptown New Orleans, like the Panama Canal. There'd be this side and that side. And what side of this thing do you live on? They stopped that too. And then they made things happen. And Bill got into transportation and alternative transportation, and probably as much as anyone, he's responsible for getting the trolley lines back on the riverfront. And of course, that is now expanding to trolley lines elsewhere, and we're trying to get back a little bit of this incredible system that we had here at one time. It's coming back. And not only that, but now he's so imbued with historic planning and offended by what he called planning by surprise. You've heard him say that many times. We just got surprised this last week with some monstrosity on the fly. Who knew about that? So Bill generated, brought in outside experts. He wrote op-eds. He met with the Times-Picayune editorial board. He wrote it, and he wrote it, and he wrote it, and now we have a master plan with the binding force of law, except for the Audubon Institute, apparently, for the city going forward. So it's an amazing record, not just a record of we don't haves, but a record of what we haves. And it's for that creativity and that stubbornness and that stick-to-itness and that ability to finish the job that just makes me super proud to be the one to give you this award, Bill. So without further ado, I wanted to call the award the Saving New Orleans from Itself Award, right? For keeping New Orleans from killing itself. But instead, in recognition of his lifetime service in environmental advocacy and historic preservation, I know no one in the country better able to claim that. So this is yours, including the sketch of the cathedral skyline done by the coordinator and chief manager of this conference, a 2L, a second-year student, Samantha Pfaffenhauer, and she's here with her parents. In fact, will Mr. and Mrs. please stand? We need to recognize they've come from a long distance. They must be here. They must be here. We need to see you. We need to see you. Just one question. When you meet them later, and I hope you will, look at the faces, Sam's and her mother's, and say, they have to be sisters. I mean, they have to be twins. Bill, what a pleasure.
This is a surprise. There were times when I wasn't too welcome around Tulane, but Board of Administrators wanted to build a highway. Thank you so much, Ollie. It means a lot. And so many people in this room. The reason I'm choked up is it brings back memories of Dick Bumbach. And anything I say, anything I did in this issue was with him. Graduate of the Tulane Law School, Fulbright Scholar, Phi Beta Kappa, but more than that, just an extraordinary person and with terrific will. And as Ollie pointed out, we went in to stop a highway that you didn't have to be a rocket scientist, otherwise was an absolute disaster. But unknowingly, we ended up challenging the existing planning process of the city and how the city operated. And so we challenged the way things had been done in New Orleans. And so it was a war. It was a war. You stayed away from parties a lot of times. You stayed away from different people. Everybody wanted that highway. That highway was the lifeblood of the city. That's the way they saw it. And those of us that opposed it were really destroying the city. So it was incredible, a lot of pressure over time. And because Dick and I were such close friends, we'd gone to Tulane Law School together, we'd been undergraduates together. Vernon Palmer and Dick and I studied together in undergraduate. Richard, you know, when you work as a team, attorneys here, law students, Dick was the offense and I was the defense. And we had facility in writing stuff together. We always knew when it was done. And Dick being Phi Beta Kappa, and I certainly wasn't. Richard had, he said, we got to make an A. And we would start out early on everything. He was an extraordinary person, extraordinary guy. And because we worked together, we saved each other. Because that kind of pressure that comes in those situations can cause you not to do the work you should do, to become irresponsible, to lose your cool, to move away from the facts. And because Richard was there, we didn't. We checked each other out. We graded each other on presentations. What'd you do? Oh, A, man. What's the B, man? Come on. We literally graded each other. And anything that the nice things that Ollie said about me, includes Richard. Thank you so much.
Please allow me this transitional comment that follows Bill's, and it reflects the close relationship between the two of them. I think I mentioned that they were both in New Orleans accidentally over Christmas, not knowing anything about the expressway. When they were approached by the restaurant owner, whom they knew, and he was in the dumps, and he said, "Why are you feeling low?" And the owner said, "Well, there's this expressway." And Bill says that he said, "What's an expressway?" That was the state of knowledge of what was going on. By the end of that conversation, and looking into it, they were back in the same restaurant. And Bill looked at Dick, and he said, "Just tell me this. They're facing going back to school, right? Bill's going back to London. Dick's going back to New York. They've got educational careers out there. They're programmed." And Bill looks at Dick, and he says, Dick says, "What are we going to do, Bill?" And Bill says, "Can you think of anything more important to do in your life than this?" And Dick says, "No, I can't. You're right." That was the symbiosis. That was the chemistry. And here is this magnificent thing that then happened and may continue to happen. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce a student who has been deeply involved in the preparation of this conference and who, by wonderful coincidence, is also an acquaintance of our featured speaker of the evening, distinguished speaker of the evening. And I'll say no more because Geyer will say it. So this is Geyer Bogan, and he will introduce Hilary Tompkins. Thank you.
My parents are not here, but my girlfriend walked in 2 minutes ago, and I'm really nervous. My name is Geyer Bogan, and I, along with Jennifer Bergeron, am the speaker chair for the summit this year. I'd like to say a few words before our keynote takes the podium. Professor Davis is in the back. He's our faculty advisor, and he always reminded us to plan a summit we would want to attend. With this in mind, we invited Solicitor Tompkins to keynote, and I must say, I'm currently starstruck in a law student kind of way. As you know, Solicitor Tompkins is the solicitor for the Department of Interior, a role that entails overseeing approximately 330 attorneys around the country and covers public lands, water, conservation, and Indian affairs. Prior to her, I forgot to mention, she also has a 2- and 8-year-old. Prior to her current position, she was chief counsel of the governor of New Mexico. As an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, much of her career has been spent tirelessly representing tribal members. As a pessimistic law student and a budding attorney, the solicitor's career demonstrates that as us students can both become lawyers and continue to serve the communities and principles dear to us. Solicitor Tompkins is not only a law student kind of hero, she's an example for anyone who strives to serve the public. I hope everyone in the audience listens closer to her story and comes away inspired. With that, I introduce to you Solicitor Hilary Tompkins.
Thank you, Geyer. That's like the best introduction I've had, you know, that I inspire students. I didn't know that. I want to tell you all that all of you students inspire me. One of my most favorite thing to do is come out to law schools and talk with all of you about my experience as a solicitor and kind of what led me to this place. I was really worried I wasn't going to get out of D.C. today because I drive out my driveway with my 2-year-old in the back, and she's got her Cheerios and her juice, and we're ready to go. I'm going to get to the airport. And it turned out the Beltway was shut down, closed, because there was a really bad accident. So I was texting Geyer, like, I'm going to try and get on the next flight. So it was a really close call. But I'm glad I made it. The planets are aligning. I was supposed to be here today. So what I want to talk to you all about is a little bit of kind of my approach to lawyering and my experience as solicitor. I think in natural resource law and Indian law, lawyers enter a really intense, conflict-ridden world. There are very many strong views on very many diverse sides of the issues we handle. And I think it can be really tough to figure out how to navigate through that thicket. Every day at Interior, there's just this thicket facing us to try and find out how are we going to navigate this path on energy development or species protection or water conservation or Indian tribes in our relationship. So as I've been getting older, and I am older, and I've been reconnecting with my tribal roots and culture, one of the things that I like to share with folks is a Navajo philosophy, and it applies in your personal life and in your professional life. I have found it to be incredibly beneficial and has helped guide me. The principle is this. It's called Hojo, and it means harmony. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Navajo issues, but you'll hear of common saying, we walk in beauty. Navajos say that. And walking in beauty means you have harmony. And the belief is your right side of your body is your peace way, and the left side of your body is your war way. And the goal in life is to strike that balance so they're both in harmony. Most of life, you're not going to be in harmony, and sometimes you need real great struggle and challenges in order to get your peace way in balance. When I talked with a medicine man about this, I said, I really want my peace way. Inside the Beltway is crazy, you know? It's like a rough scene, and thank God I worked for Governor Bill Richardson in New Mexico. He prepared me for being inside the Beltway. And the medicine man said to me, Hilary, peace way doesn't come for free, and you can't force a peace way. You have to struggle and have strife and have turmoil. Your war way has to be really activated to get to your peace way. And I actually think that's true with lawyers, believe it or not, because I think we are warriors. We're hired to fight. We're combative, argumentative, but I think some of the best lawyers I've encountered are ones that take that energy and strife and conflict and bring it into the peace way side and solve problems, find solutions, find where there's harmony in the group of whatever's in conflict. So with that, I want to go through kind of some of the issues I'm dealing with at Interior, and also kind of highlight for you where I think some of these principles come into play. And I have really found this to be kind of my guiding light. So when I first started, well, first of all, here's all of Interior's assets. We're a land manager. All of the different colors are Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation. You'll see in the Gulf all of the offshore oil and gas drilling. National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service. So we have massive amounts of responsibilities and assets that we manage on behalf of all of you. These are our clients. These are my clients. And they have all different missions. So even at Interior, we have a lot of internal discussion about how do we layer all of these missions, conservation mission, mineral development mission, water management mission, trust responsibility to the tribes, and protecting and conserving our special places and wildlife. So I come in the door, in 2009 I started, and 2010, I was just getting going. I'm like, okay, this solicitor thing, I'm getting the hang of this. And then all of a sudden, April 2010, the BP oil spill. unbelievable experience out of true tragedy and chaos and lack of direction. So we have lots of disharmony and crisis. It was literally, obviously, a crisis, biggest environmental disaster ever. We sat, I remember we'd go into the command center and see that pipe with the oil gushing out. And every single morning, we met with Secretary Salazar, and we'd look at that, the mini robot that had the camera, and it was gushing day after day after day for about 90-plus days, I think it was. No solution in sight how to make it stop. Really challenging time. Legally, I mean, I became an offshore oil expert overnight. I could not do my job. I could not have done my job without the amazing lawyers in the solicitor's office. They're awesome. They are experts in natural resource law and Indian law to a degree that just blows my mind every day. I would sit with those specialized lawyers every morning, and we suspended activity. We were enjoined by the district court for doing that. Salazar was held in contempt for issuing a new suspension to stop the oil drilling because we didn't know what was causing it. We got the contempt citation overruled, thankfully, in the Fifth Circuit, but really intense time. But out of this tragedy has now come more stability. We passed a number of regulations to reform oil and gas drilling. I now know what a BOP is. How many folks know what a BOP is? Blowout preventer. Regulations on ensuring you have, they basically cuts the riser to stop the flow of oil. So it needs to be functioning, and you need to test it, and you need to inspect it. We also, I remember Salazar said, Minerals Management Service. Hilary, what is this agency? How do I reform this agency legally? And I'm like, okay, let me look into it. Turns out it was like a 2-page secretarial order passed in the 1950s that created the Minerals Management Services at Interior that regulates this kind of activity. And I'm like, excellent, it's only a secretarial order. We can change it. So what are the chances of that? An agency that had been existing for decades. We created 2 new agencies, having the development handled by one agency and the regulation and enforcement by another. And then just this morning, as you all know, BP has been brought to justice, hugest settlement ever in the history of this country for $20 billion civil penalties. That was announced about a year ago, but part of that is the natural resource damage assessment for all of the toxic harm that came from that spill to the resources of your region, the birds, the fish, the turtles, the beaches, the ocean floor, the ecosystem. We now have nearly $8 billion to restore those resources, and the final plan was announced today. So here we are 6 years later. And so out of chaos comes change for the better and solutions. And the lawyers are behind the scenes doing all that. The next great thing I got to an introduction to, first public lands renewables on public lands ever in the history of the country. We have solar, we have wind, mostly in the West. The one thing I want to say, and our honorees' remarks made me think of this, you need to have leadership that is bold and brave and willing to break convention and say we need to do things differently. Let me tell you all of you law students, only work for people and learn from people that are like that. Because that's how you make change. That's how you prepare for the next generation. And renewables was like that. There was a lot of resistance to doing renewables, as you know, in the public discourse. But we did it, and we had targeted goals. We've met those goals. We've had 55 projects. Almost about 30 of them we've been challenged in court on. So there's a lot of litigation, but we've been prevailing because we're doing good legal work. They're tricky issues. Where do you cite these projects? Are you harming habitat for species? Are you affecting Native American sacred sites? A lot of our cases are filed by tribes. And what we've tried to do is minimize the impact. An interesting legal question, is a horizon a traditional cultural property under the law that needs to be protected, that a clean energy project can't interfere with? And in fact, there is the ACHP, the Historic Preservation Commission, has concluded on the East Coast that yes, it is. So these are the interesting questions we encounter. Traditional oil and gas development, that's a big part of Interior's work. You know, I have to say, from my vantage point, there is a lot of disharmony between what are we going to develop in this country and how are we going to be economically strong in terms of our resource development, and what are we going to conserve and protect. That is something I deal with every day inside Interior. There's huge conflict, huge debate, no easy answers, but I think in this administration, we are trying really hard to do it differently. When we came in, it was more kind of site-by-site analysis, authorization. You can have a well here, you can do a well pad there, not looking at it landscape level. And we've changed that. We've said you have to look at the big picture and look at the total impact of these operations. We have 100,000 oil and gas wells on our lands, hundreds of millions of acres. And we're trying to do things differently. We've done the hydraulic fracking rule to regulate that activity in federal development. We've been sued and enjoined. Almost every decision Interior makes, we're sued. So lawyers are we're keeping a lot of lawyers in business. And I would argue we need to not be in the courtroom as much as we are. Venting and flaring rule just got announced, which is regulating the emissions from these oil and gas activities. And here's the thing. I feel like in order to strike that harmony, if we deplete our resources in a non-sustainable way, our economic advantage will disappear, okay? We need to plan for the long term. And in my view, BLM legally has much authority to not only authorize drilling, but also to make decisions that mitigate the impacts of that drilling, that cares about the air and greenhouse gas emissions, that cares about the effect on species, that cares about a neighboring park. That is within BLM's legal authority. We are being sued in court right now because people are saying, no, BLM only has the power to let that drill go into the ground. Can't touch environmental. So we're at a crossroads legally, and again, I think it takes vision, courage, leadership to say we need to do it differently. Similarly on coal. We produce on federal lands 41% of the United States level of production. We have 310 coal leases. Most are in the Powder River Basin in Montana and Wyoming. The coal program, the federal coal program, has not been evaluated in 30 years, 30 plus years. We know that coal has greenhouse gas impacts. So again, we've said we are not managing things in a way that is sustainable and with a long-term vision, and where are we leaving future generations? This is going to end up, and back to the Navajo philosophy, if you're just being aggressive and trying to pursue a singular objective, you're going to end up with your warway dominating, and you end up actually getting sick. Navajos believe you get ill, that you're ill. You've got to think of how are we going to balance our coal program with sensible conservation and protective measures. So we've done that. We recently announced that we are pausing any future new coal leasing in this country on federal lands. And we're saying we need to look at it. I never get a round of applause when I say that other places. So this is refreshing. I should come to New Orleans more often. We are saying we need to look at the program. Where are we leasing coal? Are we competitively leasing coal? Are we getting enough royalties for the American public, taxpayer, all of you? Are we getting a fair deal for all of you? And how much coal companies pay in royalties? We've decided to do a NEPA EIS, programmatic EIS review on this. And we're going to be taking a very careful look. Again, out of change and courage to say we need to have a pause comes more balanced, I believe, solutions. And the lawyers, we are behind the scenes. We're not at all the ribbon cuttings you see, but we're behind the scenes advising the Secretary and the Bureau of Land Management. What's your authority? How can we proceed with this pause? So we're doing the right thing. The other big issue, again, I think an indicator that Mother Earth is not happy is drought and water. This is California. These are all the various governmental water systems in California. 4th year of a severe drought. El Nino's helping out a little bit, although I heard even this week it was extremely hot in California and could lead to some premature snowpack melt, which is not good. Just backing up, Bureau of Reclamation is the one at Interior who manages all our water. 600 dams and reservoirs, that's within their jurisdiction. They deliver 10 trillion gallons of water a year, which is mind-boggling to millions of people. In California, I mean, lots of litigation and that intersection of conflict. You get all your vegetables, but maybe not here in New Orleans, but in DC you do. You get all your vegetables and fruits from the valley in California. Irrigation, an important industry there. Indian tribes with senior water rights. Water irrigation districts that have different levels of priority on the river. Endangered species in the river who also need certain kinds of flows and pumping restrictions. The Delta smelt. Municipalities, human beings, we all need water. Incredibly difficult conflict with legal sideboards, scientific sideboards, judges ruling what you can and can't do. Very, very challenging stuff. I do believe in the water context in particular, litigation, I find, with a zero-sum game race to the bottom is not a solution. Because we have to have a long-term vision on how we're going to conserve and manage our water. We have to be able to store more. We have to be able to agree to not use and consume as much, provide for leasing opportunities, marketing opportunities. So really complex stuff. This is, anyone know what this is? Lake Mead. Yeah, Lake Mead. It's created by Hoover Dam. This is called the bathtub ring at Lake Mead. It's over 100 feet high. Since 2000, it's been depleting over and over as the drought continues. Again, we're trying to negotiate. We're trying to find balance with all the different states in the Colorado River and Arizona and California and Nevada. Very complex stuff. We have come this close to actually having to announce a shortage, a federal shortage in this river system, which would mean states would not be able to get their full delivery. And this dam and lake provide water for Las Vegas and Phoenix and Southern California. So we're trying to anticipate those challenges and store and make deals with Mexico. Mexico had an earthquake that ruined their infrastructure, so they couldn't take their fresh water delivery. So we went down there and made a deal and said, can we then hold it up in our reservoirs a little bit longer then? Let's not just send it to you and have it go into, a non-use situation. And that was a treaty negotiation. We did that. And guess who was behind all the writing and all of that? The lawyers. So we do good things. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm like a lawyer advocate because we get a bad rep. This is my favorite little bird. I hope everyone knows what kind of bird this is in this room. Sage, yes. So I think this is a big success story, and this is achieving a little bit of Hojo. I know some folks out west would not agree with my statement, but I think it's pretty phenomenal. The sage grouse was up for listing by the end of September, I think, of last year, per court settlement. Fish and Wildlife Service has to make decisions on whether to list species as endangered or not by certain deadlines. We did a settlement and had a deadline set up for that. This is amazing. 11 states, can you imagine? 11 states were involved. 98 land use plans of BLM, plans or amendments, were involved, which is astounding. It blows my mind. 170 million acres were at issue. And the sage grouse, this is fascinating. I love working with scientists. I love the scientists at Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS. They're an umbrella species. So their health and welfare means 350 other species' health and welfare are also at stake. So if the sage grouse is doing well, those other species are doing well. They love open plain, they love sagebrush, they love the same things cows like, which is kind of cool, because actually some of the ranchers are realizing if the sage is doing well, my cows are doing well, my cattle. And so we had a deadline. What happened? All of these governments, local communities, tribes, Interior, we all got together and figured out conservation measures to help the bird. And Fish and Wildlife Service ultimately said, we're not going to list it. But you have to commit to keep doing it. That's all under a legal regime where you have to make these commitments. And let me tell you something else. This is an important lesson for all of you law students in my theory of Hojo and harmony and balance. It's not just about the law. It's not just about policy. It's not just about money. It's not just about the factual realities on the ground. It's about human beings. And to be an effective lawyer, you have to understand the people that you are working with to try and reach Hojo with, okay? Here, there's a rancher named Dwayne Coombs from Nevada. He grew up as a ranching family, completely distrusted the federal government. Had an incident with his family where the feds during the Depression went out and slaughtered all their cattle. And the family completely never recovered from that. He had a hard time thinking, how am I going to work with Interior? They're not my friends. They're the enemy. And guess what happened? His daughter, Desi, who's 11 years old, spent tons of time with the USGS scientist who was working with the birds out in their ranch area. And he saw his daughter become friends with this scientist. And so he and his daughter would put up the little reflector tags on his fences so the birds would not fall into the fences. And he told the story about at the announcement that we had this plan, that they'd ride in the truck on the dirt road on the ranch, and little Desi they'd drive past the fences, and Desi would be like, "Fly, chickens, fly." And he's like, if my daughter can find, some friendship in a Fed, maybe I can too. Maybe I can do this. It's that human connection that can sometimes really make a difference. And so it's important to look for those opportunities to get a little bit of, resolution. Pounding your fists on the table won't do it. So in the big picture in my mind with that map that I showed you at the beginning, there is a lot of resource development and extraction in that map, but there's also a lot of conservation. Park Service, we have hundreds of parks throughout the country that have a conservation mission. Fish and Wildlife Service, again, hundreds of areas throughout the country. And to me, interior is this reflection of yin and yang, different uses of our assets. Under this administration, we've preserved many special places for the American public in our national monuments. The Solicitor's Office works on the Antiquities Act, which gives the President the power to designate national monuments. You have to have scientific or historic places of interest there. It has to be only that area which is necessary to protect those interests. We've designated, I believe, 22, maybe 23 of them so far. From San Juan Islands to Cesar Chavez's hometown to Honolulu internment camp in Hawaii to Oregon Mountains here. I had to do a New Mexico shot because I'm biased. And just the list goes on and on. Pullman in Chicago. There's many of them, and it's been a real treat to work on them. And we just announced this week, I think, or maybe no, it was last week, in California, 3 new national monuments that connect Joshua Tree with Devil's Valley and the Mojave National Preserve. Again, preserving those really important areas. Healthy ecosystems help combat some of the harmful impacts and mitigate the impacts of our development. So they need to go hand in hand. This is ANWR. We don't have time to get into the Arctic. All I can say is it's been a huge part of my portfolio. And again, we have set aside some special areas in Alaska for protection. And we've authorized some onshore NPRA activity as well for development. And we had all the issues with Shell up in the Chukchi, Beaufort Sea. Lots of litigation around that. So I did get to go to Alaska. Has anyone been to Alaska or from Alaska? It is the most amazing place ever. I took a little teeny plane into Anaktuvik Pass in the interior. And I don't think I ever want to get in that plane again. I looked out 2 hours and looking down, and I did not see one road, nothing. It kind of freaked me out. But just life-changing. We went into a native village and hung out for the afternoon and then went back. And I was like, okay, I've done that. I don't need to do that again. But and I asked the high school, you'll love this story. I asked the high school kid, I said, they're like, well, we just had prom. And I'm like, where do you guys have prom, and who do you ask to go to prom? There's only like 10 of you. And they said, well, we actually take a plane, and a different regional corporation will host the prom, and then they'll take a plane over to that other regional corporation's location. I was like, that's pretty cool. You take a plane to your prom. So it was neat. So I will always remember that trip. Point Reyes, really great issue I worked on. Also being a Stanford alum, I was like, I gotta protect Point Reyes, it's beautiful. We had an interesting issue, it's a wilderness national seashore area out north of San Francisco. Question was, Oyster Farm had a lease and it was expiring. And did we have an obligation to renew or continue that lease activity? And we said, no, we didn't. And it was time to end that operation and close it up and keep the area pristine. National Park Service manages it. We litigated that issue. It actually went up on cert to the Supreme Court. The Oyster Farm sought cert and it was denied. But really important work. And then find the park. I just like having this one in here. For this year, if you know a fourth grader, they can go to a national park for free. And it ends in August. So please take a fourth grader that you might know out to a park, or you can all go to, I suppose. But it's about, in my mind, this theory or theme of we own every decision we make, and as lawyers, we have to make decisions with a long-term view. You are representing a client, but I do think we also have our own collective morality and obligation and principles as fellow human beings to do what's right in the environment for the next generation. And we need to inspire our youth to get out to these beautiful places in America that are theirs and make sure that they'll be stewards in the future. Because otherwise it goes away, and this is what makes us so special, this country. Well, it's not, I know this is an environmental conference, but 2 seconds on Indian issues, which I encounter Indian law questions on all of the natural resource questions that come up almost all the time. They're blended quite often. Again, restoring harmony. When we came in, 100 tribes were suing the department for failing to be a good trustee, saying we had violated our trust responsibility. There was acrimony, distrust, wounds on all sides, really, really ugly stuff. When I got this position, they said, Hilary, one thing you should not do is work on the Cobell class action Indian trust case. And the first week I'm there, Secretary Salazar says, Hilary, I want you to settle Cobell. I was like, great. So, again, something that everyone said we couldn't achieve. There was great doubt. There was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of hurt, baggage on all sides. And we went in there and tried to reset a tone. The lawyers, great folks at DOJ, who are our lawyers in court, sitting there, who had been adversaries, said, okay, we're going to try and settle this. And I also think there was a moment for me where there was a critical human connection in a federal courthouse, which would be the last place you'd think it would happen. We were with the mediator. We had all lawyers on all sides of the table. And Eloise Cobell, she was the lead plaintiff for 500,000 individual Indians who were suing us for failure to manage their accounts and resources. And she was sitting there, and I was sitting across from her. And I had just gotten back from Navajo, my tribe, and I had been meeting with their tribal courts there. And first the federal judge made remarks, and all of the officials made remarks, and then he turned to us and turned to me and said, do you want to make a remark? I said, yeah. And I said, Eloise, I looked at her and I said, this is not our way. This is not our Indian way of resolving problems. This court process, it's a Western way of doing it, and it works, and you had to sue us to get our attention. But, you know, this is not the way. We're never going to restore the trust relationship between Indian people and the Department of the Interior unless we try and find a way we can live with each other and make amends. And she said, you know, I know what you're saying, like, this isn't our way. And we need to find a different path that's based on our tradition. And so that was I was like, this is a turning moment where you're starting to rebuild that trust on a human level. I didn't cite cases. I didn't tell her why she was going to lose on appeal. You know, I didn't tell her, you know, that even if you won, Congress wouldn't give you the money. I mean, I think these are critical. Know that when you're like, I see lawyers come into my office who are obnoxious. I had someone yesterday come in and start arguing this like lower court procedural point to me, and I was like, that's not going to do anything to solve the problem you're here for. Let's try and solve that problem. So I'm going to wrap up because I know it's late. But, you know, I really want to share with all the law students here that you're about to go on this amazing journey. People are going to look to you when they have a problem. And I think it's so important that you bring your personal soul to solving those problems, your values, your principles, what you think is the right thing to do. For me, and just telling you a little bit about my background, I'm Navajo. Most Indian people in this country have been profoundly affected personally by federal law and policy. I was born in Indian country, and at the time I was born, there was a policy to take Indian kids and place them into non-Indian families, take them off the reservation. I'm one of those kids. The law and policy of that time affected me profoundly. I grew up in southern New Jersey, far away from Indian country and Navajo country. I didn't see another Indian person until I was about 15 years old. I had a lot of disharmony. I had no hojo. I was like feeling totally lost, disconnected. But it's like that medicine man said, made me strong. I said, I'm going to find out who I am. I'm going to show people, you know, there was, you know, stereotypes and racism about my ability. I'm like, I'm going to show them wrong. It really drove me. So I went to college, went back to the reservation, met my family, reconnected, went on to law school, practiced in the Navajo courts before doing that. And I think that has defined my career path. So I know some of you wanted to know, how did you end up being solicitor? I think your career path is going to be defined a lot about who you are. I'm solicitor because, well, I don't actually know how I became solicitor, but but what I can tell you is my unique upbringing, where I have a Jersey side, I have a Navajo side, I don't fit in anywhere. I'm kind of on the outside looking in. I take risk. I'm a little scrappy. I'm a survivor. That made me, you know, go to law school even, take that risk. Go to DC and practice environmental law at Justice Department, not Indian law. A lot of people were like, oh, you're Indian, you got to do Indian law. I said, no way. I'm going to go do this other law. Then felt missing being out in Indian country, went back and represented tribes. Then went and worked for a state governor, which was like going to the enemy to go to the state. I had like Indian lawyers saying, you'll never work in Indian country again if you work for the state. But I like break molds all the time. I'm like, I'm going to the state. That opened the door to go to this role. I'm a Navajo solicitor who does some Indian law, but I do a lot of other law. So don't let people define your fate. Follow your heart. Work with really smart people. When you see smart people, hook up to them. And always try and find that balance in your life, in your work, and personally. And that'll, like my Quaker dad, my Quaker adopted dad, there's a Quaker saying, way will open. Okay? So thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
We do have time for a few questions if you wish, and then, of course, we are having the reception. Anything burning? Go. Matt.
I'm a member of the Quaker community. Small speakers, but I'm wondering, where did you first hear phrase or discussions with your elders,
Yeah.
when you were a little person, about Mother Earth fall?
Oh, it was in the 70s, and remember that I didn't really hear it from my adoptive family, but that commercial with that Indian who has a tear and pollution, do you remember that? I'm dating myself. And he wasn't Indian, he was Italian, right? That's when I thought about those principles.
Light bulb went on?
Yeah, a little bit. But definitely when I went back to the res, and I really immersed myself and learned so much about my culture. And it's like, to Indians, it's not even environmental, it's kind of more, it is about you and the universe, and you gotta be right with it or things go off, So that's when I really got into it. Yeah.
So, does the presidential election define the next solicitor for the Department of Interior?
Yeah, I'm out of work, yeah.
How much does the whole thing turn over? Because you mentioned there's,
Yeah.
I think, 300.
No, there's not that many. So let me explain. My position is political appointment. So when Obama's done, I'm done. And so I'm out. So I was appointed by him, confirmed by the Senate. Then there's about 5 or so deputies that work for me that are political. So they'll be gone too. But there are also fabulous managers in the solicitor's office who are going to, their career, they stay. About 20 to 30 of them, and then all the other lawyers. So yeah, I'll be out on the street here in about a little less than a year. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on that. You referred to leadership and the importance of it.
Mhm.
I wasn't quite sure what level you were talking about. I guess my
Yeah.
question is, how
Yeah.
important is the
Oh, my
President of
God.
the United States
Oh.
in influencing what all good stuff you can do
He's-
with an election coming up?
Well, and I can't get into politics at all. So, I think that the president has obviously talked about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and how important that is, and setting that agenda as a priority. So I think there's kind of the broad strokes of the policy, but then the agencies have their own statutory authority that kind of dictates what we can do. And so what we do is obviously very different than what ag can do, and energy and EPA. So it's the policy making or the policy sausage making really occurs in the agencies. And then you have huge public process, NEPA, records of decision, rulemaking. Big rules go through the OMB, so there is some influence there. But a lot of it is very technical, heavy stuff at the agency level. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I guess I had a question about the United Home of Nations
Yeah.
for federal recognition.
Right.
I guess, are you familiar with that? And what
Yeah.
are the challenges for their tribe and other tribes that are?
Yeah, I am familiar with their issue. And we just passed new federal acknowledgement regs, so there's a process for groups to become recognized as a federally recognized tribe where we have an official legal relationship. And that's been criticized as very lengthy, unfair, unclear what the standards are. Some groups have asked to be recognized and it's sat there for 10, 15 years with no action. So we've tried to reform that and have more deadlines. So you know, it is based on kind of historical facts and political existence and evidence that one group cohesively identified as a political entity for a long period of time. And it gets complicated because some of the policy of the government moved Indians around, put different tribes together, you know, had more of a focus in certain parts of this country, and really kind of said, we're not going to get involved with those folks in this area of the country, so there might not be a lot of that evidence there. So it's often a situation of circumstance. It's tricky. But we did pass new regs, so hopefully it'll be a smoother process. All right. Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't know about you, but my takeout is, particularly for lawyers, we train the war way. That's what we train. And this peace way, my challenge is, how do I build that into the curriculum? How do I build that into the teaching? Knowing that unless you do war, you never get a chance for the peace. So it's really provocative, and I'd like perhaps in class to take that up next week with you. Get your thoughts on it. And so you started something. Thank you. Now, what you've been waiting for, the reception. It's right outside. We look forward. Please join us. Thank you.